So good to see you, everybody here who is in Kiev at this moment and came during this Saturday, and also everybody who joined us online, because I know there are a lot of people who are not based in Kiev. Today in Ukraine, we really do things online as well for them. My name is Natalia Humenyuk. I'm the director and co-founder of the Public Interest Journalism Lab, which means what it means. And in fact, one of this initiative, which is called Connecting Continents, and this is the first activity of this project, is really about how the public service journalism can change, because, sorry for that, because we do nothing but journalism, honestly, and that's what, and the idea of the project was really to bring journalists to see with their own eyes, with their way to fact check, to, you know, talk to the people, and in a very professional manner to see what is going on in Ukraine and to understand what will work for their audience. I will introduce my colleagues, and they also, I would ask everybody later while asking the questions, give a bit more about your background. So we have here colleagues from Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia. Most of them have been in Ukraine for the first time. And they spent here 6 days. It's a 7th day with going to Izum, Kramatorsk, Kharkiv, Bucha, talking to the survivors and the witnesses of the war crimes from Kherson and Izum and other regions. They've met a number of Ukrainian soldiers. They've talked to Ukrainian scholars, prosecutors, met the president, the first lady, but first of all, they were able to ask the questions. But I think I myself, as a journalist, also understand I struggled a lot as a foreign reporter to tell the story of other countries to Ukraine, and I know how difficult it is actually to translate. So for me, while talking to my fellow Ukrainians and my colleagues, who really trying to understand why sometimes people don't understand what we are going through, I really thought that the first thing we need to do is to listen. Before we want to tell the Ukrainian story, before we want to tell something, we really understand what are the questions, what are the misunderstandings. And so this conversation is not in order to find the common language. We won't. We are all professionals, and everybody has professional standards on how to write the story, how to talk to multiple sources. So most of the questions would be about what really worked, what clicked, what was interesting, what you find new to your audience, because Ukraine was on the front line for so many months already, but I know Ukrainians feel a bit, maybe a bit disappointed that it's not any longer on the front lines, but we first of all want to see what would be interesting, what is missing, and I treat it as a bit untold story. So my first question would be to everybody: what do you think is an untold story of Ukraine you may convey after being here? And please start, and please a bit introduce yourself, who you are, what's your paper, and maybe I'll start with Denise.
Is this working? Hello, my name is Denise Dresser. I am a political scientist. I'm not a journalist, but I write political columns and chronicles for a Mexican newspaper named Reforma, and I also collaborate in many other forms of media. I think the untold story of Ukraine is what is happening while in the country, while there is a war waged on the front, because many people treat this as just a war story. And I think what is most interesting to audiences, in Mexico is what has happened over the course of the past year. How do you live? The way I've conveyed the story is from a human perspective of the vitality, the strength, the enthusiasm of the streets, of the cafes, of organizations of civil society, of the survivors, of everyone who I've talked to during the day, and what happens in this city at night when everything changes, when you have to run to a refuge, when you know that the first night we arrived, 52 missiles and drones were sent here. I had never spent the night or hours in a refuge, and I think conveying the duality of what Ukraine is living at this moment. Yes, there is a war going on in the front, and yet life continues here. I think the untold story also is what you're trying to do in terms of preserving memory, of preserving stories, of telling human stories, the Reckoning Project, so that there's a preservation of the suffering that can be told later on. And finally, the untold story is the quest for justice, because when it's just a war story, people aren't thinking about the future. And I think something that ties communities together is the idea that there has to be reckoning, there has to be punishment, there were crimes committed. That's why there is an international criminal court. This is something that many other countries have experienced, and they have dealt with their pasts in multiple fashions. But this would connect you to Rwanda, to Guatemala, to El Salvador, to Mexico's dirty war of the 1970s, to what happened in Argentina, and making Ukraine form part of that broader story, so that this is not just Russia, Ukraine. And finally, I think the untold story that has become very apparent to me in a painful way is just the depth and the efficiency of Russia's propaganda and disinformation efforts in Latin America, and specifically in Mexico. When the invasion began, Mexico was supportive of Ukraine. The buildings were all blue and yellow, and Twitter was alight. That has diminished because over the past year, Russia's propaganda has grown exponentially, particularly in social media. I was saying in our previous meeting that 40 new diplomats have been accredited in Mexico. They're now recruiting Mexican journalists and taking them to Moscow for media training. And the messages are always very clear. Nazis, the suffering of Russians in Crimea and elsewhere, disparaging Zelensky, you know the story. It has become a very powerful narrative in my country, and I think in other places in Latin America. And so this is a story that needs to be told and needs to be contrasted constantly with the truth. Because, I mean, it's a cliche, but it's a famous one, that the first victim of war is the truth. And I think there needs to be an effort to tell the truth, but from these different perspectives of the daily heroes, of how the duality of life is lived here, and the stories that are not from the front, and the stories that connect you to international efforts to preserve memory and achieve justice in the future.
I think we would speak on this information in particular, because it's pretty a topic, and I would be curious also to know, what really is in your countries. But I'll ask everybody has to speak. Yeah, Guillermo, and introduce yourself as well.
In English?
In English.
Okay. I'm Guillermo Draper. I work for a weekly in Ukrainian. In Ukrainian?
In Ukrainian.
Okay.
In Ukrainian. Next time.
Based in Montevideo. I'm the political editor of the weekly. I wanted in Montevideo, Uruguay. Yes, sorry. I thought everybody knew the capital city of Uruguay was Montevideo, but maybe not. Well, I wanted to just not clarify, but maybe it's not that there are untold stories here, because there has been so much work and brave work from colleagues from Ukraine and from all over the world that came to cover the invasion, the full invasion, as they say it here. He was here last year, so I think it's not that we are telling stories that were not told, or we will tell stories that were not told. But I think what we are, or I will try to do, is to bring those stories to the Uruguayan audience, and also showing that even if it has been already told a similar story, you cannot normalize what is happening, and what happened is newsworthy, even if you already talked about a war crime or everything. You have to do a story again about it, because it shouldn't be normal, and that's newsworthy, I guess.
Yep. And in order to add to that, you can also add the other questions, whether there would be somebody specific you met, somebody which surprised you. So please pass the mic. And Andrea, if you would need, I think we can also translate from Spanish if necessary. Yeah.
Okay, should I continue?
Yes, and introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Joaquin Sanchez Mariño. I'm from Argentina. I already been here. It's my third time in Ukraine. I spent the first 2 months of war in February 22, from February to April, covering the story, and I came back this year in February again. So I published, I think, more than 60 articles about Ukraine, so for me it's not my, of course there is something that I have to still write, but I don't know if there is an untold story. If I have to think in something, it's something that is not so easy to get in Ukraine these days, is stories about your previous bonds with Russia, these bonds that are lost because of the war, the friends that you used to have there, the family that you still have there maybe, how these relations, these human relations were ended, or I don't know what happened with them. I try to find some stories about, to make a link, to try to connect the people from Ukraine, but it's impossible yet, because no one is still open to, or they don't want to talk or remember any good things about the Russian people. So I think this is a topic which is still has to be told.
Andrea?
My name is Andrea Moleto. I'm a radio host from Chile. And I want to be honest, my main idea to be here is to interview Zelensky. I don't, this isn't the main goal, okay? Sorry, but this is the thing that I have to say it. Maybe for ego also, but related to the Zelensky is really attached, or it's happened more than 1 year for us. We have a lot of problems in our country, like a lot of problems, like social revolution, try to change the constitution, it's nothing happened, well, blah, 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 blah. Okay, a lot of stuff. Poverty, security and stuff. And for that, Zelensky is the person in the world that you can trust, because now we cannot trust in anyone in our country, especially if they are politicians. And for that is very a special person, power person. And for me, Zelensky was the goal, and we got it. Thank you a lot. And all of us is the same. All. I'm not saying that the rest is not important. I want to say that it's a joke, but anyway. Yeah.
I will go on. You, okay.
Wait, I'm coming. And then we start from Kiev, all the trip. That is what really the organized, and all the people who we met are really amazing for me, and I say it for all my colleagues, are really intelligent, deep, I know. And we start from Kiev, and when in Kiev you say that, this is strange, that what is the war, where is the war, where is it, you don't know, no, we don't know anything, we don't know cafes, I don't know how to say, Mac, malls, and blah, 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 and the city is going on like a tourist city, you know? And then we talk with a lot of people, and all in the brain, you know? We talk brain, blah, 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 talking. And then we came to Kharkiv, and then to Izum, and then to, what is the next? Kramatorsk. And Juanita said something like, the silence is going to start to come into the stories, the silence, the profound feelings, not the propaganda. And I don't say that everything is propaganda, but not the proper way to say, the proper stuff that you have to say it. And start to come the truth, for me, the truth, the emotion, the really touchable things. And then the words from Zelensky that they say is not related to left or the right, or to be a communist, or to be whatever, is related to human being. For me, it's really happened yesterday. And when we returned in the train, it was a really hard time, because I feel for the first time that I could understand in my body, not only in my brain. Thank you very much. That's it.
Juanita, you got your pass.
Yeah, thank you. Great to be here. I'm Juanita León. I'm the founder and director of La Silla Vacía. That is a news digital site in Colombia that covers politics. So I guess I'm not sure if this is an untold story, but I'm going to tell you what surprised me. As Andrea was saying, Zelensky has captivated the imagination of everyone in Colombia, you know, his courage, but mainly the fact that a comic becomes the leader of the most important war in the 21st century. But what really surprised me here was that really Zelensky's story is the story of every Ukrainian that has become someone else. It's like we've met engineers that have become fighters, doctors that have become military medics, the architect that was so in love with architecture now is the guide of, you know, like he's helping with the reconstruction of the buildings. So that idea of how the whole society has mobilized and has gone from being someone to being someone completely different in contributing to the war, for me, has been a great surprise. And also another thing that has surprised me is how this is such a technological war, in the sense not only of patriots protecting, you know, like the city from the missiles, but also that every person that we talked to had their phones and was documenting everything on their phones. The person that was tortured, the priest in Bucha that had helped to bury the corpse. So for me, maybe because I'm so much into this digital sphere and I'm all the time thinking of the future of digital media, for me to see how embedded in the whole understanding of the war technology was, and also all this information from Russia that is completely digital. So that was something that I was very interested in. I thought it was also very interesting to see how you are creating like the ideal army of the future. You know, the fact that is made of older people, people that come from very different backgrounds, people that are just defending themselves and not really going on the attack. I really liked, you know, for me that I come from covering the war in Colombia that has been such a terrible, cruel war with a lot of dirty practices, to see an army made of this kind of voluntary people that really understand their mission and that know that they are on the right side of history, for me was really illuminating. So those are the three things.
My name is Patricia Campos Melo. I am a journalist from Brazil. I work for the leading newspaper in Brazil. It's called Folha, and I usually cover migration, conflict, and disinformation. So it's super interesting to be in a country which is in the, you know, largest war in the last 100 years, and really technological war in terms of disinformation. One of the things that I thought was interesting is in our countries in Latin America, everybody, not everybody, but many of the leaders say, you know, we're not going to send weapons, we're not going to support sanctions because we want to stop the war. So this idea that who can be against peace, who can be against not sending weapons, we're just defending peace. And once you're here, you understand that it's much more complex and nuanced because you just freeze the war, and this is what has been happening since 2014, and this suits one of the sides of the war. And I don't think, I did not have this perception before coming here, you know, that is not really a matter of deposing arms and having a truce, because that's really not a truce, and that one side benefits from this. So this is an understanding I did not have before coming here, and I don't think people have this understanding, because when you say, I am against the war, I'm against sending weapons, and people, of course, you're for the peace, and people don't realize that you're actually helping one of the sides. I'm not saying that you're supposed to send the weapons, but I'm saying that we don't have this understanding that it's not really, it's you're just freezing a situation that is beneficial to one of the sides. And the other thing is, I think we sort of get lost in covering all the military aspects of the conflict, and mostly at this point, which is very sad, there's an exhaustion of news about the war. As Natalia was saying, you know, sometimes it's no longer front page news, and I think people forget. And I think it's always good to remember about the civilians. It's like this person who just lives her life. She has a house, and then there's a missile, and it destroys everything, and it kills her daughter, her father. And I mean, people get desensitized to those stories, so you have to remind them. It's not just, you know, two armies fighting and you don't really understand why they're fighting. No, it's this lady who lost her husband and her daughter. It's this guy who had to join the, I mean, it sounds obvious, but it's not, because we tend to forget. We're like talking about the strategy and Russia and China and the US and blah, blah, blah. And there's people, they don't have anything to do with any of that. They're just living in the wrong place in the wrong time. So, yeah.
I would give a lot time for your questions, but wherever anybody want to, I ask a couple of questions at once, so you are free to answer any of them. So mine is really about the war crimes, and that's something which I didn't know before talking to you, that this story would be interesting, because we at the Reckoning Project, after a year and a half of documenting war crimes, feel that maybe this is exactly the story people start to lose attention, because it has been already documented. There was, we've seen already the stories about the tortures in Kherson, and I found it very interesting, a huge interest from you, and I also learned that there were, that this story at least can be explained. So maybe you would tell more about that, because for me, if it was one finding, how close the story of the war crimes could be for the audience in Latin America, that would be my main one. So maybe you can tell more.
Yeah, yes, we discussed this like yesterday and today. Like in Latin America, in most of our countries, in the 70s and 80s, there were coup d'etat and military juntas were in power. And well, most of them, all of them, had this strategy of like oppressing opposition, and during that opposition and civilians most of the times look alike in the eyes of the oppressor, and so our history, our recent history, is full of these stories of people suffering torture, people who disappear, children stolen from their families. So in that sense, that's something that may relate to our audience back in Latin America, learning this, what happened here in many places that were occupied. And that's it. I think Patricia portrayed correctly in the sense that we at least in Uruguay, that we don't have a war like for 100 and plus years. We cannot relate to a strategy to pushing foreign army out of our country and all that, but maybe our audience can find a common ground to things that are happening or happened here and are happening in the occupied territories, maybe to civilians and to people who, as Patricia said, were in the wrong place, not in the wrong place, were in their place, but it became the wrong place due to someone's decision.
Denise.
I don't know if you're aware of the film that won the Oscar for Best Foreign Movie this year. It was a film called Argentina 1985, and it was a film precisely about how Argentina started to deal with the crimes committed during the military dictatorship. And you would think, well, why, if this happened in 1985, would it be relevant today? Well, because throughout Latin America and in other countries, you're seeing it here in Hungary, Poland, etc. There are processes of democratic erosion. There are authoritarian populists coming into power. There's an empowerment of militaries. And one of the reasons that I think this documenting and pursuing war crimes resonates in Latin America is because we're going to have to document in the future what is happening today. In Mexico, for example, over 350,000 people have died in the drug war over the past 10 years. There are 120,000 people who have disappeared. Yesterday, when I was in Isum and I saw the mass graves, it reminded me of places I've been in my own country, in Sonora, in Chihuahua. Here, you're much more advanced insofar as your capacity to actually find them. And you have forensic experts, and you have a vast army of volunteers who are collecting the stories, who are making documentaries, and so on. And that I feel would be a huge connection, not only with my country, but with Nicaragua, with El Salvador, what's happening with Bukele, and so many other places where violence has become normalized. We're a very violent continent, and we have a very troubled history. What has become normal to you, we have normalized for so long now. And you're giving us, I think it would be important for us, for you to give us lessons on how you document, how you collect information, how you preserve memory, and how you actually seek justice and achieve it, also with help from the international community and not just isolated cases.
I think that, well, the example of the movie is a great example. It was nominated to the Oscars, actually.
Won.
Yeah, it didn't win the Oscar, but it was nominated.
It's right. Yeah, you're
It's
right.
the German movie.
Navalny, the Navalny film. No,
No,
which
it
one?
won the movie about the second war, the first war from
Oh,
the
yes,
German
you're
side.
right. You're absolutely right. Yes.
No
Stand
news
corrected.
from the front line. Well, beside that, yes, it was nominated. I think it's very important, the Reckoning Project, and to document all the war crimes, because in these times, like post-truth time, nothing is the truth. So we can discuss later about propaganda, disinformation, and all that. But we need to. I mean, it's our job as a journalist to document the crimes, the stories, to set this is a truth. You can discuss, you can be pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian, whatever, but this is the truth. I mean, this is a story that we documented, and this happened to this person. And if you want to discuss your idea, your political ideas or whatever, you can do it, but with this truth in the table. For me, last year, for example, when I entered Bucha, the second day of the liberation of Bucha, first days of April, I entered Bucha the day that they found a basement with 5 people in there, the same day as Zelensky was there. And there was the people in the streets, all the images that you probably remember. And we have a discussion in my media, through the phone with my editor, if we should publish this video, these pictures, or not, because it was quite shocking and ugly pictures to show. And we decided to do it, to publish the whole pictures without blur or whatever. I don't know if it was the right decision or not, but we decided to do it because we thought, okay, we have to set that this is the truth, because they send me as a correspondent to see with my eyes. So if I can accredit that this is happening, that I saw this, that I took the picture, it's important to our people to know, as I said, to set this is truth. We can investigate what happened before and later, but this is real. This is a real body. So that is important, I think, to document the crimes, so we can discuss with that truth between us.
I won't ask more questions. I think that would be your turn. But before that, I want first of all to thank our colleagues who made the whole trip possible, and that would be the Kharkiv Media Hub, our colleagues from Kharkiv, but also our colleagues from Lviv Media Forum who came here, are here, and also helping us with this online broadcast. And I also want to thank another person who came for this from Lviv, which is the Yaroslav Hrycak, the famous Ukrainian historian, because I know today we speak a lot about like political communication, how to communicate in a short run. My question would be to Yaroslav to give his inclusion on more like how we can understand each other, better within the continents, what's unite us, because I also have this Ukrainian voice during this discussion.
Thank you, Natalia. It's really impressive to hear your voices. I discovered many things for myself. I've been living here for a very long time, especially during the war. I still discover something from you. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming and sharing your experience with us. I would start with the point which was dropped already by you here. I mean, we are living in the world or in the regions which violence has been normalized, in a sense. Violence is becoming a norm. And this is something I believe that's very much your countries and our country very much similar. I wouldn't say not even our country, it's most of the post-Soviet space. Be it Russia, be it Kazakhstan, be it Georgia, be it Moldova, Belarus, Ukraine particularly, it's very much about violence. Violence is very much here. As talking about the historian, I could say that violence is one kind of normal. I hate to say it normal, but still, it's a normal story of the world global history. Violence is everywhere, every time, but there are some countries that since the last, say, 70 years tried to escape from this track. I mean, know this country. They may be not good or bad, whatever, but one thing you could say, violence is very limited. And this is not our countries. This is not our regions. So, and this is something which brings history. into the picture. I would start, recently wrote a book which has a very modest title, Global History of Ukraine. A very modest title. And there is one particular connection, entanglement between our countries and Ukraine. And this entanglement is resources. We regions which are very rich of resources, natural resources first of all. And my point is that without South America and Columbus, I know that Columbus is not particularly famous personality in South America, without discovery of America, and especially silver from South America, Ukraine would ever happen as a separate nation, because there was some entanglement between silver, which is brought to Europe, and quite a sudden rise, particular rise of prices for corn. And since Ukraine is a granary of Europe, quite a sudden you shouldn't sell drugs. The best way to earn a lot of money is just to sell corn, all the kind of things on the European markets. So I'm saying it's a kind of the very close link, because rich resources, they invite violence. This is something, especially in the regions which don't have their own countries or states or some geographical centers, like a kind of vacuum. And this is the vacuum where the foreign powers slept in. And therefore, it's very much common, we are very much post-imperial, post-colonial, because of our kind of the richness of resources, very colonial, and this is something which make us very similar in this way. So you have Spain and Portugal, we have Russia and many other empires, by the way, not just Russia, but basically this was something which makes us very, very similar. That said, I'm not particularly against empire. I believe empire was another norm in the world history from most of the time until the First World War. So I would say that I wouldn't compare, say, Russian Empire with the British Empire, because I have my test. How long would Gandhi would survive if he will be living in the Russian Empire, more so in the Soviet Union, so to say? Because basically, even so, British Empire was a lot about violence, but still provided some modicum of space, all the kind of things. So what I'm saying here, that what brings us closer as well, because we are part, if I may say so, wrong empires or failed empires. Empires which failed to produce in our regions democracy or the kind of political constitution game, all the kind of things. Which means, by the other way, we have a reiterant trajectory of this kind of authoritarian juntas-like regimes. Quite often leading to fascist type. Salazar, like in Spain, Franco, Stalin, Putin, all the kind of things. So they believe this is the common trajectory, not common, but similar trajectory of both Ukraine and country South America. So in a sense, we are fighting both post-colonial legacy or imperial legacy, or the legacy that failed to deliver justice, rule of games, all the kind of things. So this is a really common trajectory. So I believe this is something very important for you to follow Ukraine, because Ukraine feels like still fighting this past and does it rather successfully. Not totally successfully. It failed in many sense, but they still keep trying. And this is the story. You still keep trying to come over the past. This is probably the most optimistic part of the story, because even so, we could consider that violence is a part of global history. You should not come to terms with this. You should fight with this, struggle with this. And I believe this is probably the most optimistic message from Ukraine. We do understand very clearly that fight for Ukraine is not just fight for Ukraine. It's not just Ukraine-Russian war. It's a war about the future design of the Europe, future design of the world. Just give an example that what will, and the end of the war would define the future of Belarus, of Moldova, or Georgia, and many other countries, which also tried to do the same thing, but they failed. But I believe in a sense also it sends a message, a very strong message to the countries of South America. Because in a way, I believe Ukraine nowadays means hope. And I'm sorry, it sounds pathetic, but sometimes it makes sense to tell something, think which sounds pathetic, but still they're very much true. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yaroslav. And now this is the time for questions. Please pass the mic. You can introduce. Yeah, we have the colleague there, yeah.
Hello, can you hear me? All right, my name is Philip Maza and I work for United 24 Media. My question is the following. A couple of months ago, I was at a party with the Bolivian ambassador of Germany. It was in Berlin, and at that party there was also the Ukrainian ambassador, and the Bolivian ambassador was not allowed to speak to the Ukrainian one due to the neutral stance, or so-called neutral stance of the Bolivian government in this conflict. And what I experienced there at kind of the top level, I also experienced personally when traveling through South America at a grassroots level, a very predominant anti-American sentiment, which of course, considering the very dark history of the United States of America in Latin and South America, is maybe understandable even. But yeah, my question, I mean, because of this anti-American sentiment, a lot of people seem to have automatically some kind of pro-Russian notion, just because in their mind this is the two poles and equilibrium and so on and so forth. So my question is, are you still confronted with that often, and is it changing?
We'll take it.
Mexico's position officially is to remain neutral. And one of the things that I found most interesting about the meeting with Zelensky was when he said, neutrality is false. It only helps the oppressor, it helps the aggressor. And this idea that Mexico, Argentina, and Colombia have about a 5-year truce, it freezes the conflict, it would allow Russia to accumulate more weapons, to Russianize the occupied territories, etc. Why has Mexico assumed that position? Because our president and many of his followers and members of the cabinet and so on are of the old left. And the old left in Latin America is very anti-American. And because it's anti-American, it sort of slides towards Russia because it believes that Russia is the more benign hegemon. And this is, I think, a narrative that Russia very quickly seized upon and has amplified in the last year of the war. During the week that I've been here, I've written 3 columns, and I shared with Natalia the responses that I'm getting on social media. I'm very active on social media, where I'm painted as like a Nazi. Some of them are very demeaning. They're anti-Semitic. They're horrible, but because many in the Latin American left, and this has to do also with who's leading Latin America today, believe that Ukraine is fighting a proxy war for the United States in Europe. And they believe that it was Ukraine's desire to form part of the West, to form part of NATO, that this is threatening to Russia, and Russia should not feel threatened. And Mexicans have been responding to me and saying, oh, but would we allow American missiles to be set up in Mexico? We wouldn't allow that. Why would we allow Russia to be encircled and threatened by missiles in Ukraine? So I think it's very problematic that you have a historical legacy of American imperialism in the region, of the American intervention in Iraq, and now why is it that Americans are the benign hegemon and Russia is the poor, encircled victim of the West and of Europe? So my answer to you is yes, it's pervasive, it's profound, it is growing. going, and it has to be countered in whatever way you can. I mean, I could share my thoughts on that, but you are dealing with deep historical forces and also with a very effective mass propaganda machine that blossoms in fertile ground.
But I want...
Russia is for Ukraine kind of like the United States
Yeah.
maybe for South America.
Absolutely.
You are not on mic. I'm sorry, so that won't be recorded. But I really want in this, when you mentioned the, and I see the question, really speak not just about the old left. If not the new left, this project wouldn't come, because I really want to tell a story, and probably Andrea to speak a bit more to explain, because I was inspired with this project when I read the profile of the new president of Chile, who said that he is not from the legacy of Castro. He's coming from the legacy of Allende. So this is not the, this is the fight against authoritarianism. And at the moment I read that interview, and yes, and the president, the new president of Chile at that time, said that while going into the holidays, vacations, he took with him the book of Tim Snyder about Eastern Europe, which for me was the sign that there is the thirst, or at least interest, for the knowledge. So exactly at that moment I wrote to Timothy Snyder and said, like, do you know some people, because there is this idea that there are people who want to learn, and he right away created a chat with Patricia. So that's how it was. So with this connection, I want really Andrea to say that, and how about the new left, you know, and I think it's also something which is absolutely misunderstood in Ukraine, like totally misunderstood. Maybe you can say what can be also that story and how it can be told, because if it works with the president of Chile, somehow it can work with the others.
Well, he's very, very special. He's one of the leaders in the left leaders, very young, 36, something like 36, I think so. And he's I think the first that is against, really against, for example, Nicaragua. For example, bueno, Venezuela, it could be more used, well, no, Venezuela, Nicaragua, and also against Russia related to, and they call in the first time invasion. For example, he used invasion. He doesn't use conflict or war, whatever, invasion. But I think that we have the same problem in part of the young left, because when Zelensky when they speak to the Congress or the Parliament, the communists don't come, I don't know when, they didn't come, and they didn't show that it's okay, but the communist is like, I don't know, dinosaurs, I don't know how to say it, dinosaurs, okay, that it's okay. We just, okay, that is fine. But, on the other hand, we have some, the other part of the left that is young, and they didn't come. And why is it that? I think that is related to USA also. It's come to USA. This is the ball. It's not come maybe Russia. It's USA, and we are part of the empire of USA that you came in. Is Afghanistan is the same that in all the country, and for us also we have another trauma, because everything is related to the trauma of each country. When you thinking about something, it's a trauma, okay?
U.S. supported coup in Chile.
U.S. supported the Allende's killing, and all the in the beginning in that it's. At the end, it's Pinochet is coming to the power. And so for us, also, it's related to that, CIA and other stuff. And it's not so easy. For example, I want to really short, but if you try to read all the comments, then all of us, after the interview, all are they, what about journalists, why they come there to, for example, they're monigotes figures of USA and puppets of USA, blah, 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 all that stuff. But there's plenty of those comments. Or I know there is a lot of, I don't know how to say, no, yeah, trolls from Russia. But there are lots of people who really feel or thinking about that Zelensky is Monigote USA.
A quick question, if I may. A question, if I may. I mean, this kind of comments on social media, you're basically referring to these comments which are kind of offensive and pro-Russian, if I say so. What about other comments? What is the percentage, or say, balance? There is a comments, I believe, also support your position or not. So this is kind of like a social survey. I don't know if you have any social survey countries.
Yeah, well, Denise, you can explain better because Denise has a big amount of followers. But of course, the majority are supporting. Yeah. I mean, Ukraine. I mean, I received, I don't know, 300 comments in the last post of the interview. 275 was supporting Ukraine. 25 was against Russia. Of course, we are looking for the 25. But the majority is there.
I see a lot of...
Sorry, I'm not talking about how many from good or bad. I say that the idea that USA is an issue and it's a problem for us to really to understand what's going on between two Ukrainian and to attach Ukrainian war is related to that.
I've seen 7 questions, so really let's start Georgi, then you, then Alim, and Olga, and another Olga, so I see some people. George.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello. George Sherman, I'm representing here BBC News Ukrainian service. Primeramente, muchas gracias por esta visita en Ucrania. Es muy importante para nosotros para explicar todos estos problemas en América Latina. Y también muito obrigado pela visita en Ucrania. Es muy importante para nosotros explicar todos estos problemas en Brasil. So my question, I will continue maybe the previous question. I think that for Ukraine to cover all these issues is there are 3 major problems. This pro-Soviet nostalgia, which dominates in some parts of Latin American society. This maybe, I think many Ukrainians will disagree with some pro-Soviet stance in Latin American societies because many Ukrainians, I think they do believe that the current Russia inherited only the worst from the Soviet Union and the worst from the Russian Empire of 19th century. The second one, this is widespread stance of many people that the enemy of my friend is my enemy towards Ukraine when they think about Russia and Ukraine. And I think maybe this Russian lobbying, because, for example, this is a particular question for journalists from Uruguay. These people, Russian ambassadors, diplomats, they have some good ties with Latin American media. For example, there is a newspaper, Diario de la Era, and in this newspaper, Russian ambassador publishes almost every week some topic, some article with hatred towards Ukraine, every week. And so my question is how to deal with all these challenges for Ukraine, how to speak better with Latin American media, how to explain Latin American societies, Latin American journalists that the current Russia actually is not like a reconstruction of the Soviet Union, that actually Russia uses this money from oil and gas just to spread hatred towards Ukraine and towards Ukrainians, and this is actually genocidal thinking against Ukrainians. They like to destroy actually this independent nation at all.
And if you as a journalist can't answer how, you can say, did you receive these answers by being here in Ukraine?
Okay, first, I don't think it's La Diaria, maybe La República, the media you were talking about. I don't know, because Yeah, and they are not big media anyways, and I think the ambassador sends letters and they publish it like they publish whatever, but yeah, not whatever, they publish. We try to interview the ambassador, and he didn't accept an interview from us, and he referred us to the articles that were published by this media, so that's why I think it's another one. And then, I mean, we here, a majority of us, you and me, we are journalists, and we try to bring the news, bring the information, the facts, craft them in a way that we make complex things understandable to our audiences as much as we can, and I fail many times trying to do so. And of course, I do not pretend to explain this complex issue to my readers in 1-2 articles, or just for being here a week. It's like, I mean, I would be like, we all journalists that are here have egos, but I hope mine is not that big to pretend to make myself understandable to all of my audiences about what's going on here. So, but you try to in my case, stick to the facts and yeah, and try to explain them, and then you give it, and then how people receive it is out of reach, and it's received in, yeah, sometimes they read the tweet, the title and the headline, and they move on. So like, it's out of our, we can control what we can control is that our job, like the sources we reach, the information we gather, how we portray, present it and distribute it, and then it's, I mean, yeah, I think we cannot ask more for journalists to do than what they are doing. I mean, we can do it better, of course, all the time. We make mistakes, we can do it better, but it won't be, I mean, it shouldn't be our goal, and it definitely won't be our, like, we won't be able to make it. We won't be able to change what people think about the war. We try to do our best with the limited resources we have to try to bring them the facts. And I think that's a big, like, job. It's not that I'm diminishing what we do. I think it's super important, but it's one small aspect of the whole public discourse and the whole public discussion. So let's try to do the best that we can, but knowing that it's not only up to us.
Juanita. Yeah, no, I think that in a way this is a very easy conflict to explain, because the people that are dying are the Ukrainians, the bombs are falling in Ukraine, so it's really so easy to explain that it's an invasion. I mean, it's not even, you know, like a fight. So I think that the moral ground of this war is very evident and very easy to explain. I think that what is more complicated is that because of the economic interests that these countries have with Russia and China, if we are willing to be on the right side of history. And that's a problem of politicians, because I feel that the people, you know, understand very easily that who are the victims and who are the perpetrators. I think it's more like the other layer, that if you want to ignore that moral ground because you have very practical economic interests, to ignore them.
Olga, and then Katya, pay attention for the question. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Oля Mirovich. I serve as the head of Lviv Media Forum. My question would be very practical, actually. I see you here sitting in the Kyiv city center, and I can imagine how long it took for you to come here, and I can imagine how you struggle with covering Ukraine properly. So maybe you lack many resources that European journalists do have. So my question would be how we, Ukrainian media community and civil society, can help you to make it easier to cover Ukraine? Maybe we can do something for you in this situation.
Journalistic.
Well, first I think we lack information, most of all, because it's not something like European journalists, they know so much more about Eastern Europe, Russia, and in our countries it's not something that you really deeply study during school. So I think first of all is a basic lack of knowledge. Like I had to read 2 books before I came here. I confess, of the Ukrainian, Russian, what's the name, Serhiy? Yeah. So just to be able not to write something completely wrong, and also to be humble that we're only going to apprehend a small fraction of what's happening here, which is basically what we do every time we go somewhere to cover in a foreign country, to have the humility of understanding that we're only going to capture a very small part of the whole picture. Having said that, I think one way that civil society can help us is, you know, sharing with us what's happening. It's as basic as that, just which is really happening here, you know, giving access to journalists, speaking to journalists. I know it's such a hassle, you know, like I'm going to speak to the 10th journalist again, give another interview, and I really appreciate it. Like we went to Izium's gentleman who was tortured, and there he was speaking for the 3rd time about, and I'm thinking, oh my God, and he was there patiently. So I guess you are already doing so much in terms of sharing your stories and giving access and being open about it.
But I have a different thing. I see that, you see, for me, the question would be, you know, for me it was also very new to be published in The Guardian and The Washington Post, writing in English, you know, and it's not like I'm boasting, but there are not so many Ukrainian journalists on the regularly writing in English, not being fixers, producers, but writing own stories, being published in the Western publication. It was always for the Ukrainian journalist, you know, a bit of the issue. You know, you can co-author, but not often. So I'm curious, there is, if there is a space for the Ukrainian authors in some of the publication, not often, but sometimes. Maybe that would be the way.
Patrick?
I'm sure there is. No, just was going to say, of course there is. It's so much better to have someone who's here and has such a much better understanding than we do. I mean, we understand what our audiences, what the approach to our audiences should be. But you as a Ukrainian journalist, you're so much ahead of us in terms of knowing what's really happening on the ground. So I'm sure it would be a privilege to publish Ukrainian journalists.
I just want to add just some practical issues. Of course, we published some articles from the Rock Project. Of course, they are really valuable. At the same time, probably our audiences, they want like Latin American journalists to make the bridge, because to understand what's empathize with us. But I think both opportunities should be there. And I just want to add for the practical issues. For example, the information about how to get the helmet, the vest, the armor, which is not, now is easier. And now there's some reporters without borders in Kyiv, that they lent the armor, but until a couple of months it wasn't so easy. To get access to good amount of fixers, to get access to the front lines and to the stories, because what happened to the Latin American journalists which came here, which is really expensive, and our media doesn't wanna spend those money, is that they don't get the stories that the big media gets. For example, BBC, CNN, they all get first and better. And it should be some, if you have the structure to help to make some equilibrium to the American media, could be great to get some access to the military, to the front line, the same as the BBC and the all European media they have, because we are fighting like David and Goliath as well. I mean, it's impossible to get the stories at the same time and the same even the same with the president. I was looking for him for more than a year, and she made it.
I think there is a very practical way of doing collaborative investigations through networks as the IFCN, the fact-checking, for example, network. I think they would be very interested in a transnational story on disinformation, where you get like the Russian part, and we in Colombia do how RT is using disinformation, and in Argentina and Brazil. That would be a great story. And I'm sure that, for example, IFCN would be happy to do it, or ProPublica, or, there are some networks of journalists who I think would be very interested in promoting this kind of investigations in Latin America. Definitely.
So, just a little thing, sorry, but it's a real thing that in our agenda, Ukraine is not in the first place. It's not. It is related to other conflicts, of course, but it's not our priority now, for example. And I think it's more useful for that there's some Latin American or someone for the country really do the story. It's not the same that we make the interview to Zelensky that BBC, okay? It's different for us. It has more, I don't know, ya se me olvidó. ¿Cómo se dice? Exacto, claro.
Denise, you wanted to add something. We have quite a few questions. I see a lot. So really, that's great. Yeah. So,
one thing that I've learned while being here and communicating to my public what is happening and seeing the reaction is a very clear perception now that Ukraine at all levels needs to communicate better. And that means thinking creatively. Not just journalists, but activists, members of civil society. This seems to be a place where there are lots of blogs, and there are social media, TikToks, social media is very active, but inside the country, not outside the country. And I'm going to give you an example, and I'm sorry if it pertains to me, but I think it's very illustrative. So I write these stories, they're published in the Mexican media, and the Russian embassy in Mexico starts tweeting about my trip. And they say, dear Denise Dresser, we would like you to understand clearly what has been happening here since 2014. You need to have a deeper understanding about NATO expansion. You have to be more objective. You have to talk about how the Kyiv regime has been bombing Donetsk and Lugansk for 9 years. You need to interview Russian specialists. You have to talk about how the West is providing weapons to the regime in Kyiv. We are always happy to help you. And then they have these very dramatic photos of a woman standing next to her destroyed house in Lugansk. And so there are 4 photos of this. This is why this becomes viral in Mexico. The response of the Russian embassy to one analyst coming to Ukraine to report on this. So why didn't the Ukrainian embassy in Mexico come out with the facts or with the response? Where is Ukrainian civil society responding to this and saying, and not even from an ideological perspective, just as Juanita said, the facts. So if you leave a void in terms of information and in terms of storytelling, someone will tell your story and they will tell it badly. And Russia is telling this story and they are telling it badly.
I've seen around like 7 or 8 questions, which is quite a lot, so I really want everybody to, you start and then we maybe would be quick. Yeah, one.
Hello, my name is Marcel Gascon. I'm correspondent for EFE, the Spanish news agency here, and I'm very interested about what you say because our stories are published in Latin America a lot, and I get the same answers to my stories many times, and most of the time what happens is that people who's pro-Ukraine, I think they don't comment, they share. But the comments are from people who speaks, who maybe, so that's my personal experience from what I published there. And I would like to get back to the anti-American problem for Ukraine. And I think what happens is Ukraine is caught in, or the Ukrainian situation is caught in the culture wars or the political wars. The old ones with the anti-American pro-Soviet left, but also the new ones, and in this case is the right, the new right who's against Ukraine. And I think to explain or to show what's happening here, for me it's very interesting to try to show it unideologically, let's say. So get out of the ideological space, of the abstract space, and show the facts, and show that people here, because that's what I'm seeing here, it's not that I want to show this or that, but it's what I'm seeing, that people is fighting for their country, and people who's maybe also anti-American people, maybe people who has nothing in common with the Biden administration or with the European Commission. So it's like a real broad mobilization. That's what I see every day, and I think that's what we should show, because that's the truth. And one thing that I think it's underreported, and maybe it's connected to this, is what happens in the occupied territories. Because I read Stanislav Asayev's book on what happened in Donetsk and Luhansk, and to me it was very clear, and to see which is the alternative to being in Ukraine. I think that should be reported more, and sometimes it's difficult because we don't have access, but yeah, that's something I think that would be interesting.
Thank you. And Olga Rudenko, Katya, there is a mic for Olga Rudenko, the editor-in-chief of the Kyiv Independent.
Thanks. I always do a terrible job like introducing myself, so thank you. Thank you all for this opportunity. Thank you for being here. It's a wonderful discussion. My question is building upon something that Joaquin said in the very beginning. You said that you want to do a story that looks at the connections that were broken between Ukrainians and Russians, like family connections and so on. And it got me thinking, this would be the kind of story where it would be very easy to accidentally slip into some of the narratives of Russian propaganda, which is probably the oldest, the most pervasive narrative is the unity of Ukraine and Russia, the historic unity. And that narrative has implications on the war today, because it's very easy to make the conclusion that this is a temporary conflict that's been, orchestrated, instigated by the West, and these countries actually belong together. So the question is, when doing stories like this, how do you safeguard? How do you stay careful and aware that you shouldn't, accidentally push a Russian propaganda narrative? And mainly, is it even something that you think about? Being careful about Russian propaganda narratives slipping into your stories. And I'm using that story as an example, but it's really a question to all of you. Thank you.
Okay.
What I think is that the Russian propaganda is working in some levels, but it's not working in the level that, it's working in the level, this is a NATO conflict, US conflict, but it's not working in the level that they're convincing people that Ukraine should be Russia. No one, at least in Argentina, thinks that Ukraine is a part of Russia, or they should go back, or they belong you. This narrative, if they are trying to put this in the minds, it's not working at all. This is not a risk. At least in Argentina, I'm quite confident that it's not a risk in our whole countries. No one is thinking that. Everyone has really clear that Ukraine is a country, independent country, and they cannot build this narrative, I'm sure. But what I'm saying this is because it is a kind of an untold stories, and you're for confirming that, but because the Ukrainians, which I know a lot, many of them, I love Ukraine already, but they're really radical in there, and I understand why. I'm not criticizing, but they are really radical and convincing in their speech. And in Latin America, when they speak, or when you listen to these speeches like Russia wants us to disappear, they want Ukraine to cease existing, every Russian, many people told me that, every Russian, not even one Russian in the war is good, everyone are evil. This really extreme speech, which is not working well in Latin America, because we are saying, okay, we are a little bit exaggerating if you think that every Russian in the world, even Navalny, is your enemy. So this is the way that I think you should be a little bit more flexible in this kind of speech or understanding.
Can I jump in very quickly? I think the real risk is not the story that Ukraine should be part of Russia. The real risk coming from Latin America is that there are too many governments who believe that peace should be acquired in exchange for land. In other words, that you should just give up what Russia has already taken and negotiate peace or a truce. That's, I think, the risk right now.
Dennis has a mic, but I also should say, you know, like Spanish, speaking Spanish doesn't mean there is one country in South America, you know, because like for us it's actually a very interesting narrative how the language, you know, like speaking the same language cannot mean, you know, being the same. Dennis.
Hola. Do you hear me? Yep. So I'm Denis Pilash, an assistant professor of the Kyiv National University and also a member of the editorial board of the Commons Journal. That's probably the most left-wing media in Ukraine. So you mentioned for several times the new left and the problems in understanding each other in our regions. And actually for us as the entirety of Ukrainian people who are now targeted by the Russian imperialism, this is a very sensitive and important question. We just lost one of our authors in the Battle of Bakhmut. And when we try to communicate with people in Latin America, we often have this response, yes? And we need to explain to people in both our regions that albeit our specific situation, our specific history is different, but the patterns of the dependency, the patterns of the imperialism and neocolonialism, they are very similar. And we understand that for many people in Latin America, US, that you all mentioned, that supported the military dictatorship, the coups and the dirty wars that were waged against their own peoples, is the empire. But for people in Central Eastern Europe, Russia is the empire with its own history of genocidal oppression of the peoples. So actually what we felt that you can build these bridges, and now we have at the Common Journal this project called Dialogues at Peripheries that is clearly trying to do the same, to bring together people from this oppressed situation in different parts of the world and having them understanding the Ukrainian suffering. So if you have these personal connections, and if people hear the human story, if they hear the story of parts of those millions of Ukrainians who have been affected by the war, they actually do provide solidarity. So maybe what do you think from what you've experienced here and what stories you have heard, what can be the most telling stories to approach, including people on the left in Latin America, to tell them about Ukraine?
Yeah, I was very moved by this soldier that we interviewed that had come from Bakhmut, and he was a union worker, a union activist, and I asked him specifically, you know, about this narrative on the left, and he said, you know, he said, I'm really surprised because I'm really surprised because I think this is a fight against fascism, and the left should always be against fascism. And I thought that was so simple, and that's something that we can relate to in such an easy way that really resonates, I think, with the left in Latin America, and I'm not sure that it has been conveyed in that way.
Alim. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Alim Aliyev. I am Deputy Director at the Ukraine Institute and Pan-Ukraine member. We talked about messages, and this war is an anti-colonial war for us. Yeah? It's not only about land. I'm originally from Crimea, but it's against our identity, against our culture, history, and our future. And My question is how this narrative about anti-colonialism will work in your countries or not? Thank you.
We are colonized by Denise. That's why we are giving her the.
I'm giving up my imperial role here.
Well, I don't know, is the first answer. Then I would say that I don't know if it will work. I mean, I'm thinking about what people from the left in Uruguay may think about it. I don't know if that's the message that will get into them. I'm not sure.
I don't think that it's work, really, because we have a really different. Is colonialism related to what? To the Spanish part? Spanish, U.S. What else?
So like it's confusing. Yeah, it's kind of makes people confused.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Maybe if we, I don't know. Maybe. Well, I'm going to say something really stupid. I don't know if it's it or not. Doesn't matter. Maybe it's Sisek and Lady Gaga, something like that, invented something related to this. You know what I mean? Like maybe popping, really to go to intellectual or musician or something like very pop. Because we are, as you are, fagocitados. How can I say? We are eaten by the Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and maybe could work in this I don't know word. That it's work.
Very short, just to give you an answer, is not the main issue. I mean, the colonialism or the empire trying to get bigger is not the biggest narrative in our countries. It's more about like the geopolitical war, China, Russia, United States. This is the political discussion, not about colonialism, I think.
I've seen two questions.
Wait,
Guillermo,
because now,
and that would be it.
Adding to what Joaquin said, if you portray this as a colonial war, they will bring up to you an imperial war. They will bring to you the U.S. I mean, it would be like in that like battleground. Yeah.
Spain.
Yeah. Your question then, and then Olena. Yeah. Yes, please. And we are rounding up. You have a mic, you do.
Thank you. Alexander Slechuk, I'm a political analyst from Transatlantic Dialogue Center. Les agradezco muchísimo por su oportunidad de tiempo a venir a Ucrania. Y in our center, we often cooperate with Latin America media outlets. And they often ask us, why should we support you? Which arguments do you have for us from another continent to be in your side? Why should not we be neutral in this? So my question is, do your societies and political elites, what is more important, understand the threat and Russian danger globally in general? Do you think that your countries in another continent really will be touched, influenced by this Russian imperialism, Russian threat here in Europe?
I think for us, Russia and Ukraine is really far away. You know, and we have so many problems in Latin America that we're completely consumed by them. But having said that, I think we fear nuclear war. I think people are scared that Putin is so crazy that he will push the button. That's one thing that we fear. And the second one that is a very clear connection is the food issue, because food prices in Latin America, or at least in Colombia, have gone up really, and that is completely connected to the blockade of Russia in the sea. So I think that idea of how we are so interconnected by something as essential as food, I think it's a story that you can really put the volume up on food.
Can I just add something? I just remembered the whole point. I mean, when you argue that, you know, Russian imperialism can be a threat, and, you know, this is something that could escalate, it's not the first time that Russia does that. Sometimes, actually, a lot of times, we get comments that are literally, what about the US? So it's like, it just equalizes everything. So that's why it's really hard to get that message across. Because then immediately you get, what about the US in Iraq? What about the US in Afghanistan? What about the, has nothing to do, totally different conflicts, I'm not saying that, but that's the way they sort of blur the discussion.
Olena, that would be the last question.
Hi, my name is Elena, I'm from Babel, and I have a very practical question. Ola previously talked about this. Would it work for your newsrooms to have a partners in Ukraine? And if yes, what kind of content do you need? Like it's human stories, it's analytics, it's video, or else?
Depends on how much we have to pay. Kidding. It's just the media outlets in Latin America in general are in very poor financial shape, as in many other places. But I'm sure there would be a lot of interest, probably not a lot of money, just a little money, but there would be interest.
My point is just it's our job, like, to bring information about Ukraine, to fight propaganda. So like it's in our interest. I just like have one project in my mind, so I'm really like asking for a reason.
Yeah, well, in my case, there going to be no money at all, but I know that it's not the issue. I mean, in Argentina they won't pay probably, but yes, videos like the viral videos, they are looking for this kind of videos. I mean, it's an awful reality, but it is. Human stories. And to understand the Latin American media, I would say, you have to understand that they have lack of resources and employees and time. So as finished is the piece, the better. So it could be in Spanish, would be great, could be in English. Video, picture with the caption and all like ready to publish. And this is the way that I think you will get more republished information.
I want to thank after a long reporting trip, and I should be very honest, it was very intense and I wanted to do always more, that you still spend the day to share and answer the questions, to do something beyond what journalists do, but I also want to pass the mic shortly to summarize to the colleague of mine, because I'm kind of often present as a face, but I want to praise also Oksana Pokalchuk, who is the project manager for this project, and a female human rights defender, who joined our team, PIGL team, to, also mention, give also your impressions, because we spend a lot of times, we observed something, so I want you really to also, like summarize what you learned as well, as somebody who joined and listened.
A little bit things. Yeah.
Don't talk about our time, how punctual we are.
We're always on time. How we raise the bar for food.
And that we are always on time.
We have a lot of stories. Yeah, I can tell you after this. So first of all, I want to start from saying thank you. Thank for all of you to come, because it was a quite intense week. You traveled a lot. You didn't sleep well. I mean, you didn't sleep at all. You've been working hard all this time, and I hope it will make a big change. Make a big change for Ukraine, for Latin America countries, and for the whole world. Why I think so? When the full-scale invasion started, it was a time for us, for Ukrainians, to speak out. Like, it was a moment when a lot of people who never thought about this before occasionally found themselves here in Ukraine as a Ukrainian. We refound our identity, we refound our language, we refound that we are post-colonial countries and all this, and we became like screamers, we've been saying to ourselves, first of all, who we are. We are Ukrainian, we are fighting, we are protecting ourselves, and we here, and we want to be here forever. And after this trip, after this long time with our colleagues from Latin America, I realized that now for us, for Ukrainians, it's time to not only say who we are, but it's time to listen to other countries who they are and how our message was already received there. What people heard in many, many different countries, how they perceive us, how they see us, how they understand us, and maybe to learn more about that countries and found similarities. Not like here in Ukraine, there were a lot of questions today about post-colonial, imperialistic. You know, we use some narrative that's important for us, but maybe it's time to hear and a little bit change the messages that we send to the world. And the change has to be based on the deeper understanding of the history, culture, and the current political situation in many countries all around the world. So I believe that it's like a brilliant project. It's a first step, so we see now brilliant journalists from Latin America. Just a big, small spoiler. Soon we will do another trip for journalists from Africa, so we will do like more. And I believe that these talks and these common, you know, the possibility and the steps to find a common ground, how we can speak about important things, is the only way how we can really stop Russia, win the war, and build new identities. I hope that many more people in your respective countries will just learn about Ukraine, learn about us, and that's the way how we can bring the bridges.
I'll finish, I round up.
Yeah.
Thank you, Oksana. I also want to thank all the team of PHL and everybody who joined. Again, to Free Press Eastern Europe, who facilitated the project for us as well. But again, like Lviv Media Forum, but Kharkiv Media Hub. And probably to summarize still something else, it's not about the Latin America or the continent, but about the journalism. At PIGL, Public Interest Journalism Lab, with some of the co-founders, they're coming from different professions, we always have an argument like, does journalism matter? And there would be always people trying to slide us to advocacy, communication, things like that. And I do understand it can be a bit uncomfortable for journalists. My role here is always to say that there are diplomats, so we invited here political scientists, you know, people who work with the communication. Do your work, please do. The journalists can't do everything. What journalists can do, tell the truth and tell the story. And for us, this initiative is just nothing beyond making the neutral and the most professional journalists coming and, you know, telling the story. And I honestly believe that really works. So for me, it's all reinforcement of like pure, neutral, very good journalism as really something which can be very, very strong. And everything else can do the other things as well. So please join. We do our professional thing. You do others. But we, of course, can communicate. And thank you so much for doing this, and I would say goodbye, and we will definitely, follow. Thank you.